Interpreting z-scores. Complete the following statements using your knowledge about z-scores. All right, so let's first review z-scores. Z-scores are scores of relative placement. So let me give you a quick example to help illustrate the concept. If you have a random variable x, say adult IQ scores, and we happen to know from previous research that the population tends to have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, then we know that the mean, which is 100, has a z-score of 0 because it is 0 standard deviations away from itself. If we go to the right 1 standard deviation, we would have 115 as an IQ score. And what z-score would that be? That would be 1 standard deviation above the mean, so that would be a z-score of 1. And similarly, if we subtract 15 from the mean, we get an IQ score of 85 with a z-score of -1. And you can continue on in this way to get 2 standard deviations. So we're going to add 15 again so 115 plus another 15 will be 130 as an IQ score, and that will have a z-score of 2. And -2 as a z-score would correspond to an IQ score of what? Subtract 15 from 85 and you get 70. And finally, we go up to 3, and that would be an IQ score of 145. And -3 would be an IQ score of 70 minus 15, so that would be 55. All right, now why did I stop at -3 and +3? We could keep going, but we know that 99.7% of values tend to fall within 3 standard deviations of the mean. So we typically see the z-scale shown only to -3 and +3 in most cases, but it can go beyond that. It's just that those values would be extremely rare. Okay, so that's what z-scores are, so let's see if we can use that to answer these questions. A, if the data is weight, the z-score for someone who is overweight would be what? Should it be positive, negative, or 0? Well, we saw that if you're above the average, that would mean you have a positive z-score. So being overweight would certainly mean you have an above average body weight, so we would have a positive z-score. B, if the data is IQ test scores, an individual with a negative z-score would have a what? Would it be an average IQ, a high IQ, or a low IQ? Well, again, we saw that when you go below the mean, you get negative z-scores. So an IQ score with a negative z-score would have to be one that's on the lower side. And C, if the data is time spent watching TV, an individual with a z-score of 0 would be what? They would be watching the average amount of TV, very little TV, or a lot of TV. Well, we know that the z-score of 0 always corresponds to the average or the mean, so that would be the answer there. D, if the data is annual salary in the US and the population is all legally employed people in the US, the z-scores of people who make minimum wage would be what? So if it's minimum wage, that would be most likely lower than the average salary, so it should have a negative z-score.